Hi, everybody. It's Marika here, Executive Director of History Cambridge, and I am excited to be joined tonight by Josie Kuchta. Josie gave a history cafe about the history of brick back in May 2024 at our History Center in North Cambridge. And a lot of folks, myself included, couldn't be there that night. So we thought, why not get Josie to do a recording for us? We can all learn about this amazing brick history of Cambridge, specifically North Cambridge. Now, you can read her bio below, but Josie is an almost lifelong resident of Cambridge. You moved here. How old were you, Josie?
6 weeks old.
Okay, so we're gonna let that slide. She grew up here and she went to Wellesley, which is where she did some deep dive into Cambridge's brick history. And so she's here to talk about it tonight. Josie, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So
This
why
is
don't
such
yeah, let's jump right in.
okay.
You have some information to share.
Mhm.
Let's see.
Okay. Well, hello everyone. My name is Josie Kuchta. I work for Agency Landscape and Planning here in Cambridge. I grew up in mid-Cambridge, and most importantly for this, I did a senior honors thesis at Wellesley College, studying the history and legacy of brickmaking, focusing on a historic site in North Cambridge known today as Jerry's Pond. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, Jerry's Pond, or Jerry's Pit, is a water body next to Russell Field and the Alewife Tea Stop. Today it's fenced off and difficult to connect with, but it used to be the heart of the brickmaking industry in the Boston area. The brickmaking industry began in North Cambridge due to the combination of railway access and ample natural resources. The Fitchburg Railroad, later Boston and Maine Railroad, was extended through North Cambridge in the early 1840s and created new opportunities for industries that were loud, smelly, dusty, and required large amounts of land. Soon after, ice houses, tanneries, slaughterhouses, streetcar repair sheds, and brickyards popped up along the tracks. These quote-unquote unsightly industries were considered the quote-unquote urban fringe, close enough to Boston to sell goods, to manufacture bricks for the developing neighborhoods of the Back Bay and Bay Village, and far enough to not disrupt the upper-class residents of Cambridge. So Cambridge in the 1840s also saw many new workers, Irish immigrants fleeing the potato famine, who found little work aside from that as physical laborers. For about 40 years, they were the main workers in the brickyards, digging clay from the ground, operating pug mills that processed the clay, forming bricks with rectangular molds, setting them out in the sun to dry, loading wood-powered kilns that baked the bricks, and shipping them to Boston in train cars. The work was done mostly in the warm weather when the sun and warm breezes could aid in the drying process. Soon there was an influx in French Canadian immigrants who were largely seasonal workers. They came to Cambridge to work in the brickyards every summer and returned to their families in the winter. In the 1880s, the French Canadian workers started to stay and establish roots in the community, building churches and local businesses, including the Notre Dame du Petit Church on Rindge Ave and Massey Hardware, formerly at the corner of Sherman and Walden Streets. Maps from the 1880s show French Canadian residents moving right in the middle of predominantly Irish blocks. Comparing these maps, it's remarkable to see how quickly North Cambridge changed as brickyards expanded and workers settled around them. The brickmaking industry was closely tied to the economic cycles of the 19th century. The economic booms of the early 1870s and late 1880s saw an increased number of brickmaking companies, and the panics that followed in 1873 and 1893 saw the closing and merging of lands. The greatest change was in 1901, when all of the brick companies at the time merged into the New England Brick Company, otherwise known as NEBCO. With a monopoly on brickmaking in North Cambridge, NEBCO was able to maximize local resources, including its experienced labor force. Business consolidations in the industry, however, did not end at the borders of the city. As its name suggests, Nebco bought out brickyards throughout New England, with its main locations in Cambridge and Gonick, now Rochester, New Hampshire. As labor became more expensive and many New England industries shifted their bases to the South and the Midwest, Nebco maintained its dominance over regional brick production. The company adapted even as the demand for brick cycled with the economy, weathering recessions with the long-standing support of local institutions.
Josie, where is that picture? Where's that picture from?
That is from North Cambridge, in fact, right along Rindge Avenue, which was Dublin Street at the time.
Can you describe what we see in this picture?
Yeah, sure. So this very odd dome-shaped building, that right there is a beehive kiln. They shaped it in that curve to help with the airflow while they were firing bricks, so they would all bake more evenly. On the right of that, the very tall tower you see is a smokestack. So the smoke would have come out from the firing process. Behind there are the drying sheds. So this is the part before firing, where you have to get the clay as dry as possible. And so they would leave them out in these long sheds for days or weeks at a time to kind of take out all of the moisture. And then on the left side, I believe this is more at the in the forming of the bricks earlier on in the process, when they're using hands and as well as machines to what's the word? To form the bricks into the shape that we know.
Mm. How many people would be working inside the beehive?
So the kiln would get very, very hot. So usually when it's at full blast, there aren't any people working inside of it, but there are constantly people loading wood into the fire. In terms of numbers, I think at the height of the industry, there were about 2,000 workers in North Cambridge across several brickyards. So it really was a booming industry for the time.
Cool. Thank you. So this is in the winter, it would be less busy.
Right. Right. You need to have enough air circulation and warm air especially to help with the bricks drying out. So initially they only worked in the summer because that was the only time they had this warm air. But then innovation later on meant that they could dry and fire bricks throughout the year.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So to get back to where I was, during economic booms, more residential developers and business owners could afford to build in brick. In the 1920s, later on, when residential brick construction peaked and the larger arts and crafts movement was popular, homeowners particularly valued the aesthetics of experimental brickwork. As expressions of craftsmanship, misshapen quote-unquote clinker bricks that had once been hidden or discarded were now featured in wall patterns. There was more creativity in these brick patterns as well, and brick became known as an elegant, historic, and charming material. From its inception, brick manufacturers had also been focused on innovation. Early brickyards capitalized on their proximity to the railroad. The 1854 Walling map of Cambridge, which you can see here, shows train tracks throughout Hubbell's Brickyard, located between then Spruce Street and the Fitchburg Railroad, highlighting that train infrastructure was used not only to ship finished products, but also during the industrial process. By 1890, the Perry Brothers and Company had adopted new steam-powered technology for their brickyards at the end of Raymond Street and along Concord Ave, from steam shovels to automatic brick forming machines. By 1940, 50 years later, Nebco had automated machines for processing and molding bricks, more efficient steam dryers. As I said, these steam dryers would help production occur all year round. And a traveling crane to set the bricks into the kiln.
I'm fascinated by this picture there, in this picture. I think they're
Mm-hmm.
so interesting. And
Mm-hmm.
what kind of people would operate this? Like how many, you need one person to lay it? The next picture shows two people working together.
Mm-hmm.
Did most machines require two people or one or more?
I think these you could have two people working at the same time. But right, the whole point of having a machine is to speed up the process and to use fewer workers. So when brick makers might have done all of this by hand in the 1840s, by the 1940s they had machines to really help with the process. So
Mhm.
some of this could be pretty hands off. The machines could run on their own. They could press the clay into these brick molds, which I love. I think they're such fabulous objects because you can see where the bricks would have gone during that process to create that very distinctive shape.
Mhm. What was the texture of the clay when it was put in a brick mold?
By the time it's formed into a brick mold, it's a very smooth clay. The initial part of the process of processing clay is designed to take out any kind of roots or soil or impurities that you wouldn't want to end up in the final product. So it's very, very clean and very smooth at this point. But then as bricks get moved around and when they get fired, the surface changes a lot. When bricks are fired, the outside basically turns to glass. That's how it you have that hard texture on the outside. Um, and that changes the texture as well. But yeah, these images, many of them are from History Cambridge's archives, are just fabulous.
What year is this one, do you think? Or these photos?
These photos, I believe, are from the like a range of times between 1925 and 1942.
Mhm, mhm.
You can see, maybe you can guess by the style of the hats. So by this point, by 1940, brickyards required many fewer workers and fewer horses, but they still employed the sons and grandsons of those early laborers, which I think is such an interesting connection to keep this industry not only within the same location, but also the same families and the same communities. So, as an intergenerational industry rooted in the neighborhood, the company struck a balance between historic charm and technological innovation. The Great Depression and World War II struck the brickmaking industry with force. Brick production could not directly contribute to military needs, and with little money in construction and few remaining laborers, Nebco struggled. By the 1950s, not even their long-standing relationships with local institutions were enough to keep them in business. The once abundant clay was used up, their machinery was outdated, and neighbors' patience with the noise and dust was worn thin. By 1952, I know this photo is very, very blurry, but you can see this was taken from a news article in 1952 when the Nebco's brickyards were closed. the last steam shovel was buried, literally buried in the clay, and they had to close their business. So Nebco folded in 1955, and within a decade, it was difficult to find evidence of new brick construction in the Boston area. Stripped of their industrial value in 1955, North Cambridge's brickyard sat vacant. Over the next 30 years, the city transformed the former industrial sites to meet contemporary needs. While one of the earliest dug clay pits, just south of Rindge Ave, was covered over for a public housing development in the late 1960s, known as Rindge Towers, Nebco's last operating brickyard, contemporary Dennehy Park, was slowly filled in with municipal waste. The image you can see here is Jerry's Pond, this site just north of Rindge Ave, being used as a swimming hole. So the neighborhood finally saw significant growth in the 1980s with the extension of the subway line from Harvard Square. Just as the railroad connected the brickyards to downtown Boston from the 1840s onward, the subway connected the largely residential neighborhood to the region's economic opportunities. Soil from the subway's excavation filled in the city trash dump, making way for Dennehy Park. Traces of the up to 80-foot deep clay beds are no longer visible across the contemporary playing fields, paths, and playgrounds. Nearby, other former brickyards and tanneries were transformed into highways, shopping centers, and parks. As it had since the 1850s, North Cambridge remained on the city's outskirts. The end of the subway line signaled the edge of the city. In the history of Western Alewife portion of North Cambridge, former Harvard administrator Kathy Spiegelman explains, the activities themselves would change, but the urban fringe character remains to this day. The demolition of Nebco's last remaining buildings in 2000 marked the end of the industrial campus. The brickmaking industry had witnessed and contributed to the rapid infrastructural, population, and economic growth of the Boston area, but now that industry had become invisible. Both the brickmaking industry and the local community that maintained it deserve recognition. For my thesis, I designed a monument to both, placed on a former industrial site, Jerry's Pond. This structure could have a greater impact beyond the bounds of an academic inquiry. With social, logistical, and financial backing, the monument has the potential to be constructed along Jerry's Pond and become a fixture in the neighborhood. This installation would require the support and participation of the surrounding community, just as they participated in brickmaking decades ago. Encouraging public participation could honor this history while bringing people closer to the common elements that make up our world. Stopping to consider the building materials all around us enables a more meaningful connection with the places in which we live. They attach us to the physical, historical, and cultural context of our built environment, making it feel like home. Together, we could further contribute to the collective narrative of North Cambridge, one brick at a time.
Amazing. What are we looking at here? Fingerprints?
Right here we're looking at some fingerprints left by a brick maker, and this sidewalk is on Harvard Street in mid-Cambridge.
Where is your favorite place in Cambridge where you can sense this history, but you can't see it?
I mean, I think Jerry's Pond really called to me in some ways, because it is the only site left that hasn't changed. There was a very large brickyard across Rindge Ave, where the Rindge Towers now are, and you really can't see that site at all in the current landscape. But Jerry's Pond remains as this reminder of the industry and the people who work there, which I find really, really fascinating.
Yeah. What drew you to this project?
Well, I first thought it up on a study abroad trip in Copenhagen, Denmark. The city of Copenhagen is surrounded by brick. They've been building in brick since the very earliest settlement of the city, and I was able to visit a brick manufacturer in Western Denmark who still makes bricks nearly the same way they did um, uh, in the 17th century. It's astounding how long they've maintained these traditions, and seeing what the industry meant not only for this factory but the community who surrounded it was really interesting. And then to see those bricks built in structures in Copenhagen was really wonderful. So coming back to Cambridge, my hometown, I wanted to see how I could translate that process.
Yeah. Do you think a lot of people know about the brick history in Cambridge? People in Cambridge know about it.
Only a select few, I think. Those who are really excited about Cambridge history know something, know that it was an important industry at the time. But not many folks know the details around the kinds of workers who worked in the brickyards and lived in North Cambridge. It was quite hard to find any information on the exact workers. I could kind of piece together information from historic maps and from newspaper articles at the time, but there's so much that we still don't know about the people who worked here.
You know, it was interesting when we had our space on Mass Ave, and I did a little research. I was looking in the census data for Cambridge. I, I think 1870, maybe 1870 census. And I was, I did a search by where people were from, where their parents were from, because I was interested in the French Canadian. I have French Canadian ancestry here in Massachusetts. And to see there were just dozens of pages, dozens, just
Mhm.
flipping through of like bricklayer, page after page. And it's all these young men, you know, in their 20s, teenagers,
Mhm.
coming out and working here is remarkable.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, Tell me about, from the pictures and from what I gleaned, it was men that worked in brick. I'm assuming no women worked in brick.
Correct.
What
Correct.
about kids? Were there any children, jobs for children?
Um, we don't know exactly. From the records that we have, they all seem to be um, young or middle-aged men. The photographs from that are taken of Nebko's yards are almost entirely young or middle-aged men. So we don't know about children. We don't know about women. Surely there were women supporting the industry, whether from home or supporting the workers in other ways, but we just don't have records of that. So I think children also would have slipped through those records.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I know people think of, Jerry's Pit and Danny as the sites, but I live very close to the Tobin School,
Mhm.
and which was Cofran's Pit,
Mhm.
and all, it's very similar history, right?
Mhm.
Just they extracted all the clay, and the pits would fill up with water. And I did some research on that because, I shared it at my local block party.
Mhm.
And it just the heartbreaking accounts of people drowning in those pits,
Mhm.
right? It was a very sad byproduct of the industry, right?
Mhm. Yeah, there are several accounts of young people. Even there was a Harvard student who drowned in Jerry's Pit at one point. Several horses who drowned um, because they didn't have that water body designed for swimming. It was designed for industrial use. And so Jerry's pit, for instance, filled in with water after only about 3 years of being dug for clay. And so from then on, it took on these other purposes, but no one had really intended it for swimming, and so it wasn't safe. It was too deep for swimmers to swim without worrying about drowning. And then later on, there were a lot of pollutants added to those water bodies that made it unsafe.
Yeah, people just throw their garbage in there.
Right.
And then the kids would go swimming.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to swim in garbage? I certainly don't.
Those poor mothers. The kids are coming home after swimming in garbage water all day. So it's interesting that you said that the bricks, the industry was exhausted, right? Pretty much, right? And but then where does Cambridge get its bricks?
Today, Cambridge mostly gets its bricks from Stiles and Hart, which is a company based in Bridgewater, Mass. And you can recognize their bricks by an S+H logo. Most of the streets in Cambridge now that have brick, such as Harvard Street, or other streets that are still predominantly in brick, you can often find S and H logos in the sidewalk. And they are the only remaining brick manufacturer in Massachusetts. They've been around for as long as Nebco, but haven't been as dominant in the industry until after Nebco kind of fizzled out. And today are really the only option for local brick.
So I know that brick sidewalks can be a little contentious. Some people find them unsafe, and some people find them quaint. Do you care to weigh in with an opinion?
I mean, personally, I love brick sidewalks. I appreciate the charm that they bring to a street. But I also understand that they're a hazard for a lot of folks year round, and then even more of a hazard in winter. Oftentimes, they're very hard to shovel, which can be an issue in Cambridge, or ice can seep into the cracks between the bricks and make it less stable of a surface.
But they're here to stay.
But they're here to stay, yes.
When you walk down the street and you look down and you see a Nebco brick, what is your reaction? Do you just kind of pass by, or do you give an audible?
I definitely squeal with excitement a little bit. I would say much of my camera roll for the past several years has been brick sidewalks. And my family and friends know that anytime I'm walking and I see a loose brick on the sidewalk, I always have to turn it over and see if I can find the frog, the stamp on the back that says the brick company.
And it's called a frog?
Yes, the stamp and then the indentation on the bottom of a brick is called a frog.
Good to know.
Yeah. There's some great words. Great words.
Give me another one. I heard pug mill.
Yes. A pug mill is a machine for processing clay. It's what separates the pure clay from roots and other impurities that you're trying to extract before forming the bricks and firing them. And that machine was operated by horses for many years. So horses would walk in circles and circles, and they would be tied to this handle that would churn the pug mill, like an older version of a hand mixer. And today we have machines that do it much more efficiently than horses were able to. But it's a very useful machine.
Tell me about different colors of bricks.
So
What the?
Cambridge predominantly you'll find red bricks, like you can see in this image, and then darker, almost black colored bricks. And all of these bricks come from the same kind of clay. Cambridge has blue clay predominantly, which turns red when it's fired. And different places will have different kinds of clay that naturally occur. So for instance, when I was in Denmark, they had a lot more yellow clay. And so their bricks were more yellow, more sandy in color. Whereas here there's kind of a red oxide color to a lot of our bricks. And then the darkness comes when you fire them. So just like this is a little graphic, but just like when blood dries out, it turns dark. When bricks are sucked of their oxygen, when they have no oxygen, but they're still being cooked in the kiln, they turn a black color. They lose all of their oxygen, and that changes the color of the brick. So you get this natural variation when bricks are fired because the ones in the center are a lot more tightly packed, and so they have the same heat, but they don't have as much air around them, and so they tend to cook and take their oxygen out and turn black. You can also change the properties with adding sand or adding other minerals to the outside of the brick, and that can change the color as well. But generally, the brick variation that you see is just from firing naturally.
Cool. Thanks for that. I'm interested in if you learned or heard or read about the native people using the area before colonization.
Certainly there were Native American communities here. We don't know of them using bricks. There aren't records of that that we have access to at the moment. But we know that when the English colonizers came, they brought bricks with them. Bricks were initially used as ballast. So to weigh down a ship, you usually need cargo. And so during the Triangle Trade, which Boston was a part of, ships would come into Boston Harbor to collect goods from the Boston area. And those ships would often come with bricks to weigh down the ship before they were loaded with goods. So then you would have bricks just tossed on the side of the shores in Boston when the settlers would leave and take their ships. And so we know that the earliest brick buildings in the Boston area were used with these ballast bricks from shipping. But we don't know anything about brick usage before that.
Mm-hmm. Do you work in clay yourself?
Much of my thesis was working in clay. I can flip back a few images, but I made these handmade bricks. I molded them in a brick form that I made just like you would in a factory. But then I realized that they were too big, that they didn't fit comfortably in my hands. I have pretty small hands, and the bricks that would have been the standard size just didn't feel right with my body. And so I made bricks that were scaled down to my size. So I kept kind of the standard dimensions, but then just made them a little smaller so they fit much better in my hands. And then I would pick up the bricks and kind of shake them so that they would both warp and leave the imprints of my hands in them. So much of my thesis was experimentation with clay, which was immensely satisfying, and then kind of thinking about how do I learn from that experimentation and bring it to this context of this rich history.
Oh, great. So what's next for your project? Where are you taking this? You've already graduated.
I've
So
already graduated. Yes, I now work at Agency Landscape and Planning, which is a local landscape architecture and planning firm in Cambridge. And we do work with brick, but I don't have a lot of opportunities in my role at the moment to really push a brick agenda. So we'll see where that takes me in the future. I love to continue doing more research, and would really love to be able to make this project a reality. I put all of this time and care into designing this monument, and we'll see where it goes in the future.
awesome. We're going to put information up about that accompanying this video so folks can check that out and share their thoughts. And if anybody has any questions about anything you presented, put them in the comments. And Josie will find a way to get those answers to you. Josie, thanks so much. This was fascinating. And I think that anybody, once they hear about this history, they can't think about North Cambridge in the same way. And I hope they think about it in a richer way. I'm sure they will. So I appreciate your time and all the effort you put into this project.
Thank you for having me. This a really lovely way to rekindle my research and get to share it with folks. So thank you.
So take care, everybody.